Hello, my name is Keith Thomson with the Armadale Church of Christ. We've been studying through a series of the heroes of the faith, and the last hero that we've looked at was the great man, the Apostle Paul. We're now going to be looking at some of his co-workers, those who traveled with him and helped him in his work. And today we're going to be studying the man Silas. Now, Silas is his Greek name. He's also known as Silvanus, which is his Latin name. So it can be a little bit confusing when we read it, but this is the same man. Now, we first read of Silas in Jerusalem. Paul and Barnabas had to go down there to sort a problem that had happened in Jerusalem but had spread to Antioch. And there they met this man called Silas, who was known as a leading man among the brethren. He traveled back to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas and encouraged the brethren there because he was a prophet. When it came time for Paul to go on his second missionary journey, there was a dispute between him and Barnabas, and Paul chose Silas to travel with him, and he made an excellent choice there. He did wonderful work with Paul, showing his faith, showing his teaching, and showing the encouragement that he had for all the people that he spoke to. They traveled throughout the Galatian region and finally ended up in the city of Philippi, where they started a wonderful work there. But then trouble struck. A slave girl was there who was demon-possessed, and she used to make her employers money by fortune-telling. Paul cast out that demon, and that caused a great deal of problem for the Christians there. Notice, as we pick up the passage in Acts chapter 16, and we're going to be reading verses 19 through to 25. So Acts 16, starting in verse 19. But when her masters saw that their hope of profit was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. And when they had brought them to the chief magistrates, they said, "These men are throwing the city into confusion, being Jews, and they are proclaiming customs which it is not lawful for us to accept or to observe, being Romans." The crowd rose up together against them, and the chief magistrates tore their robes off them and proceeded to order them to be beaten with rods. When they had struck them with many blows, they threw them into prison, commanding the jailer to guard them securely. And he, having received such a command, threw them into the inner prison and fastened their feet in stocks. But about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns of praise to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. This might seem as a terrible, terrible fate for Paul and Silas. They were cruelly treated, beaten with rods. Can you imagine broom handles being struck down on your back and then thrown into the deepest part of the prison with your feet in stocks? That Paul and Silas could not sleep, but rather than bewailing their fate, Silas, along with Paul, showed their great faith as they were singing and praying to God. All the prisoners were listening to them. You know, there's a lesson here for us that when we live faithful lives, we are a witness for Christ. And Silas showed his faithfulness at this time. But then an amazing thing happened. God sent an earthquake to come. It shook the prison walls. It opened the gates. It loosened the chains on all the prisoners. This was a miracle from God. The jailer, who just assumed that all the prisoners had escaped, sought to kill himself, but he was stopped by Paul. Notice what we read continuing on in verse 29. But Paul cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Do not harm yourselves, for we are all here." And he called for lights and rushed in and trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas. And after he brought them out, he said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And they said, "Believe in the Lord with all your household, and you will be saved, you and your household." And he spoke the word of the Lord, and they spoke the word of the Lord to them, together with all who were in their household. And he took them that very hour of the night, and washed their wounds, and immediately he was baptized, he and all his household. And he brought them into the house, and set food before them, and rejoiced greatly, having believed in God with his whole household. This terrible situation of these two men, Paul and Silas, thrown into prison, led to conversion of the Philippian jailer. The one who had treated them so wickedly was changed. And he said, "What must I do to be saved?" You see, belief, faith, is the start of our salvation journey. Without faith, we cannot please God. And then this heathen was told what he must do. And they spoke the word of the Lord to him. They preached Jesus to him. And immediately, that hour of the night, he was baptized. And then he took Paul and Silas in this beautiful scene, and he takes them into his house. He gives them food. And the one who did the beating then washes the wounds that he caused on the bodies of Paul and Silas. You see, this is what a faithful example can do. Faithful example, doing the Word of God and sharing the Word of God, can change lives. Paul and Silas continue to travel southward from Philippi through Thessalonica, Berea. They went to Athens. And the last we read of Silas traveling with Paul is in the city of Corinth. But that's not the last of Silas. The book of Acts stops there. And while we long to hear more about him and his work there, we don't. But later on in the book of 1 Peter, we read of him, and we know he's continuing his work and continuing his faithfulness. Notice what it says in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 12. Through Silvanus, now remember that's his Latin name, Silas's Latin name, through Silvanus, our faithful brother, for so I regard him, I have written to you briefly, exhorting and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it. You notice what the Apostle Peter says? He is a faithful brother. Silas truly is one of the heroes of the faith. If we want to be those who are regarded high in the faith, we must have faith and be faithful. Jesus said it this way: "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and yet do not do what I say?" If we have faith that Jesus is the Son of God, we have to be faithful, and we've got to do what he says. Thank you very much, and goodbye for now.